of the story of COVID-19, and keeping innovation and creativity front of mind is, it cannot go without saying how important their work is. So Brock, to you and your team, I just wanted to put that out there. David, hey!
Greetings. It's a pleasure to be here, both with you and with the team in Turkey. This is a fascinating time in which, on the one hand, the world is shutting down, but on the other hand, the world is opening up. So the fact that we can have this global conference from Colorado to London to New York to Istanbul is wonderful. And that probably wouldn't have happened, at least this soon, had you not had a pandemic.
I think so too. And one of the things that David, you're, first of all, like reading your bio and all of your work is, it's like when you get a chance to interview somebody like you, like where do you start, right? And so, you're a VC, you're an author, you're a creator, you're a mentor, you do all of this work for the greater good. Like I've read your stuff and I know that you're in it for the right reasons. And my question to you right now, especially during this pandemic time, is, what excites you? What inspires you right now? Not necessarily just in the startup world, but as a human.
It may sound strange and it may sound self-serving given the context of this discussion, but what excites me now is what has always really excited me to the very fiber of my being, and that is entrepreneurship. I mean, I consider myself first and foremost an entrepreneur, and I think entrepreneurs change the world. We are these weird, bizarre people who don't think like anybody else thinks. The incidence of sort of natural-born genetic entrepreneurship in the world is about 1%, as far as I could tell, and we just approach the world from a different perspective. And so you combine entrepreneurship on the one hand with rapidly advancing, exponentially advancing technology on the other hand, the work that I was doing at Singularity University, and you take the globe. So now you have this global village that we're all in. You have technology that is exponentially advancing, allowing untold and unthought of amazing things and improvements in everything. And then you add entrepreneurs who rule the world, and entrepreneurs are creating all this new stuff. So effectively, you have a universal, amazing global canvas. You have tools with technology that were literally unthinkable a decade ago. And you have these 1% of the population, entrepreneurs who can take these uncertain times, challenging, changing times in the best of times, and now even more so in a pandemic, and apply that entrepreneurial magic with all of this technology to all of these new areas.
Going back to what you were saying
it's just
earlier,
an amazing time for entrepreneurship.
Applying entrepreneurship, how do you do that? How do you teach that? How do you promote that? Like, what is that magic? And is it innate in our souls, or how?
That's a very interesting question, and it's two sides, right? One is it innate? And two is, how do you teach it, or even can you teach it? And so I've been laboring in these vineyards for literally decades. I founded the entrepreneurship program at Singularity University. I'm on the entrepreneurship advisory boards at Columbia and Yale and Stevens and other places. I've written, as you noted, a number of books on the subject. And I have come to the following conclusion: that I think about 1% of the population, global population, without regard to national borders, is just genetically, psychiatrically entrepreneur-oriented, right? And so that 1% just fundamentally thinks differently from normal people. It's not better or worse, it's just different. I mean, and I am one of those. I'm actually a fifth-generation entrepreneur. Back in 1997, I was a finalist for the Entrepreneur of the Year award given back by Ernst & Young here in the U.S. My father won it in 2003. My father is now, 90 years old. I mean, yesterday he gave a webcast on all kinds of prison reform and God, other kinds of things. So I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and I was born that way. I started my first company when I was about 12 years old. I started companies in high school, in college, in business school, in the dot-com boom, after the dot-com crash. So I am just innately my first instinct is to, oh, there's a problem, let's go solve it. And by the way, if you solve it correctly, then you solve it in a way that creates value for other people and for yourself. So that's essentially an entrepreneur. That being said, although I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur, I am really the only one in my generation of my family. I have an insanely accomplished family, but they are editors, they are business people, they are academics, they are writers, there are other kinds of things, but they're not entrepreneurs in this weird way. So there is something genetic or psychiatric about entrepreneurship that's about a 1% incidence. That being said, there is another type of entrepreneur, and this other type of entrepreneur accounts for probably 75% of the people who start new businesses. And that's what I call self-made entrepreneurs. These are people who are entrepreneurial. In other words, if you think about entrepreneurship as a spectrum, some people are not at all entrepreneurial, some people are that 1%. But of the other 99%, it's sort of a bell curve, right? And people who are toward the entrepreneurial end of that bell curve and have experience in over a career in a particular area, and they understand the domain, they see a challenge, they can think of a way to improve on that or to do something that has value, and they rationally, calmly set out to be an entrepreneur to start a business. And so, in fact, most of the independent small businesses in the world are like that, particularly in the United States. It's not a survival economy here. In places, some places in Africa where you have, 70% entrepreneurs there, those are survival entrepreneurs. You will do what you have to do to feed your family, whether it's, making handcrafts or farming or whatever. But here in the US, where people have an option, I think you see about, 1% are the self-made, and another, 3% of the population, who account for 3/4 of the new businesses being started, are these self-made entrepreneurs who rationally, intellectually, decide to do it and solve the problem. Now, to your second question, that's the first one. Yep.
I have a question. Okay. So, thank you. That was very generous and a great introduction to the topic. But so entrepreneurship in the United States is very much ingrained in our culture, right? Like that we do things, like that's just kind of how it's a very new topic when you go to places like Croatia or Africa. It is, when you say, I'm an entrepreneur, you're basically, to the elders, you're saying, I'm a member of the mafia, right? Like I'm working for myself. Like, so the question becomes, how can we, as advocates for entrepreneurship and startups and leadership, how do we get that? How can we change that?
But the interesting thing here is that I would posit that there is the same incident of entrepreneurs in Africa than there is in the US. And so, as I said, it's this 1%, these natural born entrepreneurs, this 1%. You put me in a room, give me 15 minutes, and I will tell you exactly who they are. I mean, we know who there is. I have much, much more in common with a Turkish entrepreneur, natural born Turkish entrepreneur who's doing something, than I have with the average American. Because the average American is not an entrepreneur. Now, what we do have is a society that in the US that has celebrated entrepreneurship. And there is a very interesting book, which might be for those entrepreneurs on this call. There's a great book. It's called The Hypomanic Edge, How a Little Bit of Craziness Equals a Lot of Success. It's by a guy named John Gartner, who was a psychology professor at Johns Hopkins here in the US. And he noted that there were some people who seemed to be marching to a different drummer. And he was struck by a cover of Newsweek magazine with a picture of Bill Gross from Idea Lab. And it was, this man just lost $1 billion. Why is he smiling during the dot-com boom, the dot-com crash? And he said, well, maybe these people think a little differently. And he did a survey, and he found that he did 20 or 30 of these entrepreneurs, asked them questions like, here are 17 diagnostic symptoms. Do any of these sound like they describe you? Flooded with ideas, don't suffer fools gladly, think you can control the world, take risks, things like that. And, usually when you do a survey, you get back, well, maybe yes, on a scale of 1 to 10, 5. What he got back was like, 10, 10, 10. Yes, that's absolutely me. And it turns out that the diagnoses that he was doing had come from the diagnostic manual, psychiatric diagnostic manual, and are something called hypomania. And hypomania is a condition from the Greek, mania being sort of craziness, and hypo meaning a little less than. And so hypomania is one notch down from mania. And mania is a psychopathy where you're treated with medicine and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing, there are 17 characteristics, and if you think of it, look at the list, they describe every entrepreneur you've ever seen. And there is one diagnostic difference between mania, which is a psychopathy requiring medical intervention, and hypomania. And you know what the one diagnostic difference is?
Yeah, what is it?
Hypomanics are functional. That's the only difference. They have the exact same set of these crazy characteristics, but if taken to the extreme, you need to be locked up. And if it's just less than that, you actually can function as an entrepreneur. So he then did this, carried the study further and said, if the ultimate form of entrepreneurship is picking up your entire life, moving your family to another country, starting from scratch, right? That's creating something new from yourself in the beginning. Maybe there's a link between entrepreneurship and immigration. So
Right.
he said, okay, let's look at the incidence of entrepreneurship versus immigration in countries. And it turns out that you look at the US, Australia, Israel, many countries that have very high levels of immigration turn out to have matching high levels of entrepreneurship, which is really, really interesting. So that's what's a little unusual here.
It is interesting and it's fascinating. And your body of work, like one of the things that struck me about your messaging, and like I have never had the opportunity to say this, but you have this message where, and you say it in your TED Talks, you write about it. It's very much a part of who you are, and that's the emotion part of entrepreneurship. And I just wondered if you could talk to us about that, because I think it is largely ignored, but highly important.
I agree. It's absolutely highly important, and it ties into a number of things, including in pitching, right? So when you're pitching, if you take the look at the sort of McKinsey method or the big consulting things or corporate pitches, they say it's all numbers and facts and blah, 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 blah. But in reality, when you're pitching a venture to angels or VCs, it's all about story. It's all about narrative. It's all about authenticity and who you are and what you are. You are a storyteller, telling the story and inviting your audience to come with you on this really interesting journey. And so, as I've said in my TED Talk about how to pitch, and in classes when I train entrepreneurs, there are, if you look at sort of two most important things, the absolute two things that are critical when you are pitching your new venture to a potential investor. The first of these is integrity. And integrity, from the Latin integral being one, you are one thing. You don't say one thing and do another. You mean what you say what you mean, and you can be trusted. And this is not just a goody two-shoes thing because I'm a nice guy. This is a serious business thing. And the reason for that is, if I'm investing in your startup venture doesn't really exist so far. You're creating something new in a business that doesn't exist, because that's why you're creating it. And so therefore, I can't look at your past track record of this business generating XYZ, income a year, and I'm looking at it like I would buy a corporate stock. No, this is all in your head. And so I am betting everything on you being able to take something out of nothing and make this work. And so therefore, as the founder, as the entrepreneur, you will be making decisions every day, every hour, every minute. And if I can't trust you to make a decision for the good of the company, as opposed to the good of you personally at the expense of the company, I will be second guessing every decision you ever make. And you know what? My life is too full. I can't afford to spend all of my time second guessing your decisions. I have to at least I'm not going to assume that you'll make the perfect decisions, that you're always right, because God knows I am, and nobody else is either. And so I don't expect you as an entrepreneur to be right all the time. I do expect you to be straight all the time and to make the best decision you can make for the company, given the facts as you know them. And I hope they're the right decisions then. But that's number one. So the first thing, most important, is integrity. And the second thing, right next to integrity, is passion. Because being an entrepreneur is the loneliest, toughest, gnarliest, nastiest, most stressful thing you can literally do on the planet. It's worse than being an air traffic controller or a firefighter or a tightrope walker or a bungee jumper. I mean, but they're just crazy. You know, wingsuit flyers and stuff. No, these are controlled risks. And true entrepreneurs don't think of these as risks. I mean, if you literally put on a wingsuit and jump off a mountain and, you know, without a parachute, it's a risk. I don't care how you describe it. It's a risk, which is why most of them actually have died. But in entrepreneurship, we as entrepreneurs don't think we are taking risks. We are looking at it and thinking, okay, I can control my environment. If I do this, then that should work. It might not work, but it should. It's rational. It's not rolling the dice and gambling and putting your hands into fate, right? It is controlling your environment. And that's one of the essences of entrepreneurship, a sense of control. Now, you will never have a total sense of control, because you are subject to the entire big areas of the world who are always knocking you about and beating you up in competition and pandemics and heaven knows what else, right? But entrepreneurs have, if there's one thing they have, and there's a great thing called effectuation. I don't know if you've heard of effectuation. I hadn't until somebody actually asked me about it on Quora. They said, what do you think of effectuation? I said, I don't know. What is it? So I went online to research, and I found a site called effectuation.org, which I would highly suggest to everybody who's listening here. effectuation.org. Effectuation.org. And so I look at this site, and I see this whole paragraph about entrepreneurship and this whole, what seemed to me to be like psychobabble. Well, entrepreneurs, blah, 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 blah. And I said, what is this? But then I looked at it more closely, and it turns out it's coming out of University of Virginia, Darden Business School, where they have done research about, not like every other business school telling you what you should do to start a company, to be an entrepreneur, but it was really descriptive. And they got the point that I've been saying, which is that these entrepreneurs are weird people who just think differently. So their question was, okay, what is it how do these people think? And the whole thing of effectuation was looking at entrepreneurs and trying to analyze how they think and sharing that method of thinking with everybody else. And they nailed it. And one of those things, and a great example is, if you take a regular person and you say, here is an objective that you're trying to get to, and here is where you are right now, and this over here is the world as it exists, right? So how do you get from here to there? So if you look at a regular person says, oh, well, let's see, can't go through here, so I'm stopping. And if you look for a sort of entrepreneurial person, they say, I can't get through here. Oh, well, you know, I'll go over the top, or I'll go under the bottom, or I'll go around over here, right? And that's if you're entrepreneurial. But the true entrepreneur has an entirely different approach. The natural born entrepreneur says, this is where I'm going. I want to go, and this is where I am. Well, what happens if that's not there? What happens if I can actually change the world and just have a clear shot from here to here to there? And so entrepreneurs change their environment. They change the fundamentals of the world, and that's just the way they think to do that. So anyway, I highly suggest that people look at that and understand how entrepreneurs think. Now, that's the question that you asked.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I agree. I mean, I think that, you know, with entrepreneurship and, you know, the creators and the innovators and the disruptors, it's very hard to define the characteristics of entrepreneurship. However, you have very specific and very interesting insights on leadership, right? Like that seems to be an anchor in the body of your work. And I wondered if you could maybe talk us through, like, you know, a founder is not necessarily a leader. A leader is not necessarily a manager. So how do you put all of these components? Like, I loved some of the stuff that you have to say about the inspiration of great leadership.
And so the essence of leadership is you can't force somebody. It's one thing to be a, you know, North Korea leader. Okay, do this or I'll cut off your head or disappear you, right? You know, that's not leadership. That may be something else, control, but it's not leadership.
Right.
And leadership is a combination of inspiration, inspiring people to do things, but you can inspire them. Jesus Christ was a great inspiration. He wasn't a leader per se. He eschewed leadership, right? He didn't say, "I am in charge. I am doing this," right? He was an inspiration. So the great leader, especially in a business sense, has to inspire people, and so that's a whole area of itself. How do you inspire people? Well, it gets back to the first two things I told you before, right? One, integrity. If people don't trust you, you're going to have a problem leading them. That's why, the current U.S., who has got a minority of the country who trusts him, has leadership issues over here, right? So they have to trust you, number one, and they have to believe that it's important to you, and that's passion, right? And so, clearly, you can just tell from this conversation, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I am a naturally passionate person. I am this passionate about everything. I'm eating breakfast. I just live in passion. And every successful entrepreneur that I've seen is passionate. Maybe not this kind of passion, talking fast and talking with your hands, but you can be a very calm, controlled passion where it comes out in everything you're saying. That's perfectly valid passion too, right? So integrity, so people can trust you. Passion, so they know what's important to you. And passion is catching, right? And then you have to be not only, legitimate in high integrity, but you have to be able to have an EQ to understand your people to some extent. Not everybody has the world's great, EQ and be able to understand from an empathetic perspective. I'm not that empathetic. I'm sympathetic, not that empathetic. But you have to be able to understand how to work with people, how to help them. Much of life, whether it is in leadership within a company or a marriage or anything else, is giving. And if you are trying to keep for yourself, people understand that. People know what you're doing, and they're always cautious, and it's always becomes headbutting, right? But if you are giving, as you pointed out, I spent a lot of time teaching and writing and mentoring and giving back. And that's the kind of thing, you cast forth your bread upon the waters and it will return tenfold. The more you give, interestingly, the more you get. So if you're a leader who has a vision, who has integrity, who has passion about that, can share that passion and wants to help his or her followers or employees succeed, that's the essence of leadership. And whether or not you actually economically make benefit from it, you will be able to attract people to work with you, and those relationships will last a very long time.
So, okay, a quick question, and then I know, Barack, we need to open this up for the audience, but how do you, first of all, don't drink Diet Coke. It is very bad for you. But second of all, how do you build trust as a leader? Like, what are some of the tenets of trust building?
The first of them is very, very simple. Do what you say what you're going to do, right? And you do that over time. You build a track record of trust. Trust is not something that you get instantaneously. You can't press a button and get it. Trust is something that builds over time, and it builds gradually. The more experience you have with somebody, and then if you do anything at all to violate that trust, wham, you lose it. And then you're right back at the beginning. You've got to build it up again, right? But once, and so therefore Shakespeare, he who steals my purse steals trash, but he who takes, my good name takes that which not enriches him, but makes me poor indeed. So ultimately, if you have a reputation for being trustworthy, that is the best thing you can have. David Rockefeller, who was the chairman of the Chase Bank in New York, in the U.S., and was one of the great American financiers, was actually my family's banker at Chase Manhattan Bank back at the beginning of the last century. There's a long history there. And somebody once asked about the Rose family, and he said, well, the Roses make mistakes like anybody else. But at least with the Roses, the odds are 50-50 the mistake will be in your favor. So that kind of reputation and that kind of trust is something I have been given from my father and my grandfather and all the way back. So I start out with an enormous level of trust because people know that everything any Rose has ever said, they deliver on what they're doing. And so therefore, the weight of that on top of me is very, very, I can't afford to lie. I mean, I don't lie, but I can't afford to do it because I would be blowing 100-year tradition and reputation for integrity. And so therefore, if you are consistent, if you do what you say and say what you do, deliver when you don't promise something you can't deliver, absolutely, right? You can promise to try. If you can't be sure you can deliver it, you can promise to try, and that's perfectly viable. If you promise to deliver it.
Like your body of work and you know, your integrity and character, I mean, it really kind of boils down to, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be judgy here, but it is a very authentic, like the authenticity with which you present yourself and how you coach your startups and how you coach entrepreneurs. Like the authenticity is unique and special, and it is a great gift to those who get to experience it.
I'm blushing. Thank you very much. But I would bring that back to the very first thing I mentioned about integrity, right?
Yeah.
The root of integrity is integral, meaning one. So what what you see is what you get. You can like it or not like it. I can talk too fast. I can be too emotional. I can be whatever. But this is me. This is me 24/7, 365 since the day I was born. Right. And so therefore, this is the me that you see in a webinar like this. This is the me you see in my 10,000 Quora answers. This is the me you get as an investor. This is the me you work with as an entrepreneur. And so that it is the authentic me. This is not a facade I'm doing. And so authenticity, integrity, and passion with a base of morality and ethics, so that what you're doing authentically, you're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
That's the critical core piece, and you can't buy that. You can't borrow it. It comes from just doing something. And if that has not been the way you have lived your life until now, you start doing it now, and then you start building that over time. And it may take a year or 5, 10 years, whatever it is, but you will eventually get that. And anything you do to go off that path, any shortcut you take is going to blow it for you. So be consistent, be authentic.
Be authentic. I mean, I think if there's any message that shakes out of our conversation today, it's that know what you stand for and be authentic and be genuine. And I really do. There are so many questions coming in for you. So I don't like, Brock, do you want to, how do you want to do this? Also, right. Who's doing your hair, David? It looks good. It's pandemic.
So some things genetically, I'm an entrepreneur, and genetically, I just happen to say I have amazing hair. And so the problem is, I actually haven't had a haircut in 8 weeks. So I've got to cut from the back of my collar over here.
It looks fantastic. You look like a little bit rock and roll and a little bit poet dreamer. So anyway,
Bridge is just the look I'm going for here.
So there are many questions. I have gathered all the questions, and I'm going to ask them. Of course, they're coming from some YouTube and also here. So let me ask you, what is the key to be considered a born entrepreneur of the so-called 1%? The first question was, I think, from the first questions of the interview.
Okay, I have changed on this one over time. I used to say real entrepreneurs, right? The real entrepreneurs are this 1%, right? And then I started true entrepreneurs. And then I started getting attacked by my own family and a bunch of other people there who were saying, if this is innate, what you're saying is nobody else can be an entrepreneur other than this gifted 1%. And so I have refined my thinking over time. And that's why I divide it as natural born entrepreneurs and self-made entrepreneurs, right? And there is a difference, and I really believe it. So 3/4 of the entrepreneurs in the world, and the people who start these businesses, even decent-sized businesses, are self-made entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurial. They think about self-starting. They don't need somebody to tell them what to do. They see a problem. They proactively got to try and solve it, and that's great. And that's entrepreneurial, and that's perfectly fine. That being said, there is this 1%, which is, and I don't know whether it's genetic or psychiatric or chemical or whatever it is, right? Nobody has studied that so far. But I will tell you from experience, and because I am one, that 1% is literally on a different place. It's like some people are just schizophrenic, or some people are whatever it is. That 1%, those entrepreneurs, either they know if they're in a culture which celebrates entrepreneurship like the U.S., you know what they want. I mean, every entrepreneur I know grew up, they were getting a lemonade stand in their backyard when they were 10 years old. I found a photograph of my father and his lemonade stand back when he was 10 years old, which was interesting. So they have a whole track record and history of starting business, of starting things, doing things themselves. What's interesting is in other cultures where entrepreneurship is not celebrated, people can be that 1%, but have received no role modeling and no support for it going on, and life for them can be very difficult. I was speaking at the annual entrepreneurial conference in Scotland last year, and we had a speaker's breakfast at the morning, and I was having breakfast with 8 of the leading entrepreneurs in Scotland, and these are people who have created these really big businesses. And I had an epiphany. It was fascinating. First of all 8 clearly evidence these same kinds of characteristics that we're talking about. But 4 of them had grown up in families where their parents were, or one of the parents was an entrepreneur or business and knew about it, and they were encouraged to do that, as I was from early on. They were encouraged to start a business. The other 4 in Scotland, a total first world economy over here, grew up with families that did not know from entrepreneurships, did not know from business, that looked at this child and said, what kind of weird thing? You should be a priest or go to law school or be an engineer or something. What do you want to start something over there? And for these 4 out of the 8, it was really, really tough growing up with this psychiatric thing about being an entrepreneur, but finding no societal, familial, cultural support for it. And in each of those cases, it was only after they got to be 20, or I think in one case mid-30s, that they finally said, "Ha! I guess I'm entrepreneurs," and they got their company started, right? And so therefore, the message here would be: if you are that kind of person who knows you're not alone, right? So you are an entrepreneur. Go out and do something. If you're somebody who thinks you might have that, if you see problems and want to solve them and change them, and go out and do it. If you are more concerned about solving the problem than what other people are telling you about it, right? You may well be an entrepreneur. Frankly, if you're listening to this webcast, you've taken the first step, right? And so if you feel that way, if you feel this compulsion to start something, and you're listening to this thing, you probably are an entrepreneur, and don't let anybody push you down. Go out and exercise those entrepreneurial muscles.
Great answer, by the way. So second question is how this outbreak, COVID-19, will change the investors' behavior and also the entrepreneurs who would like to approach them. Should do against it, or what do you think about it?
It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, in the immediate near term, everything has stopped. I mean, it's venture capital literally shut down for a month or two. And so it's not great to be, when the whole world is collapsing, it's not a great time to do anything, right? That being said, it's beginning now to get back to some semblance of normality, and venture capitalists invest money, so they need to look at companies. So they're beginning to take meetings now to do things. On a longer term basis, the kinds of things they're looking at have subtly changed, right? Whereas before we were, through the end of last year, we were still at the tail end of a boom period that was, the sky's the limit and let's look for moonshots and so on and so forth. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is looking at the fragility of the global ecosystem. Cash is king. Cash has always been the most important thing for a startup company, but now survival and runway is critically important. And so you're going to see a lot fewer ideas. VCs and angels never fund ideas. They fund businesses. But they're not going to be funding businesses that are based primarily on a long shot idea for the future, not going to make any money until maybe somehow it'll create value. You're going to see a lot more show me the money. Show me how you get to your first dollar. Show me how you get to self-sufficiency and runway. So you have a lot more pragmatic business plans coming in. Then valuations have taken a haircut of probably 20, 30, 40%, which is unfortunate if you were looking to raise funds now as opposed to 6 months ago, but that is what it is. And so entrepreneurs will deal with that. The nice thing about entrepreneurs is that, we're like cockroaches. We will survive a nuclear explosion over here. Whatever the situation, is thrown at you, valuations are here. Okay, I'll figure out how to make a business down here. They're over here. I'll do something else. So the world innovation has not stopped because there's a pandemic. The world is existing. Technology is continuing to accelerate. And this is actually a great time to be an entrepreneur. But money is not going to be that easy to find as it was in the boom days of 6 or 9 months ago.
You are very active on Quora, by the way. How do you plan your daily schedule?
Well, I'm one of those people who do as I say, not as I do. So I am a really the role model pieces that I would suggest. The integrity, I think, and the passion are things that are good. The rest of my life, you don't want to try and emulate. I happen to have been blessed with the entrepreneurial gene. I think it's a blessing, even though it's neither good nor bad. It is what it is. And as our moderator was noting, I was blessed with decent hair, which is very nice. I also have been blessed with a lot of energy and need for a little sleep. So I probably sleep 5 hours a night. So that means you got an extra few hours in the day to do things. And it so happens, as you can tell from these answers where I am just pontificating over here and throwing out prescriptions for what people should be doing, Quora for me happens to be the absolute ideal drug. It's like the 100%, mainlining, heroin here, because we have, 400 million people who want to know what I think, who are asking me questions. And I can just sit here and answer questions. I've got 100,000 followers or whatever on Quora. I've written 10,000 answers. In my family, we have what are called daddy answers, which when my first child was born, I decided that since you have to be able to trust your parent, that any question she asked me, if I answered it, the answer had to be completely accurate, completely legitimate. And if she never heard that subject raised again until she got to graduate school, and she then had to write an answer on a test, that the answer I gave would still be legitimate. So therefore, a daddy answer is the shortest possible answer that is absolutely undeniably correct. Now, even if you're talking about, why is the sky blue or whatever, it still gets to be sort of longish answers. So a daddy answer tends to be a little bit longer answer to a simple question. And since I go through life giving daddy answers, as you've seen in this call, my family and friends and employees long ago have given up and they see me coming and they run away. And on Quora, I have people who want to hear daddy answers, who actually upvote me and say nice things about me for daddy answers. So for me, it's a total drug, and I just love answering questions and sharing what knowledge I've got.
You are very passionate, David. What motivates you? You have already told that you don't sleep so long, but how do you wake up every day? Why do you wake up every day? What is the motivation?
Well, again, and this is going to be, I probably shouldn't say this because it's going to make people want to kill me, but the fact of the matter is that one of the other things that I was gifted with, naturally from the fairies gifting you, is a completely unique condition, which it is insanely rare. And that is, sit down and hold your horses. Believe it or not, I am always happy. Literally, I was born happy. I am happy like this 24/7, 365 since the day I was born. You probably have never come across anybody who is always happy. Most people don't believe that it can exist, but my 90-year-old mother will be happy to testify that I was born with a sun over my crib, and I have been happy like this, and it drives my family crazy, my kids, my spouse. Trust me, the worst thing you could do is live with somebody who is always happy. Don't worry, be happy, right? You want to shoot them. But that being said, if you take the combination of things that make me, right? Energy, entrepreneurship, happiness, optimism, totally optimistic. That means I get up every morning and I say, whoa, what does the day have to offer, right? Look at how can we change the world? And so you combine all those physical things with the cultural stuff of being an American, first of all, and growing up in my family of these overachievers. I was brought up from day one that my goal in life should be to produce more than I consume. that I and my whole family have been so lucky. I was born healthy, and I was born with all these great characteristics, and in a family with resources in the US, in a free country with a great education. So much has been given to me that I owe it back to society. And so if there's one thing that drives me, it is giving back to society, to produce more than I consume, to leave the world a better place than I found it, to pay it forward. And that, combined with the rest of me, is what drives me.
Perfect answer, by the way. So, one of the questions is, could you share your personal library online after reading your book, wondering your keystones in your archive? Do you also share the books that you read? And do you recommend us any books recently you have read in the lockdown period?
So this is one of those things where, again, do as I say, not as I do. Well, I happen to be a prodigious reader. I happen to come from a family of readers. I read about a book a day. Unfortunately, the books that I read are garbage books. So I would not recommend anybody read the thrillers and mysteries and stuff that I read. I also, by the way, happen to be a book collector. So outside of this whole entrepreneurial world, I have an entire a second life in the arts I collect books about books. It's a very meta collection. So I collect books about the history of printing and the history of books. I'm actually, my hobbies is letterpress printing. So I have a whole antique letterpress and I print things directly. So I have a library of over 6,000, 7,000 books about the history of books. So that's what I collect. So I read garbage and I collect books about books, none of which is applicable to the answer to the question. That being said, I have prepared a reading list from my Singularity University entrepreneurship program class, which I'll be happy to share. I'll send you the link so you can put it out. It's a list of probably 24 books, things that I think are really important, right? One of the very key things. So let me give you a few of the highlights, right? There's a book called The E-Myth Revisited, E-MYTH Revisited. It's a pretty short book, and that's a great book for understanding the difference between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs, right? The difference between a baker and the owner of a bakery. It's a fundamentally mind-shifting book. And so for people who are curious about it, whether, what the difference is, that's a great place to start. There is another book that I think is critical to understanding the world going forward, and that's a book called The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, who was the co-founder of Singularity University. And that's all about advancing technology and how the world is changing. And so what Kurzweil projects is that like Moore's law, computers, number of chips on a transistor, chips on a circuit, transistors on an integrated circuit is doubling every 18 months. If you keep going with this, doubles, the curve looks like this of technology. And so Kurzweil projects that at some point in the future, computers and humans will merge. And at that point, when you have, whether it's cyborgs or the Matrix or whatever, however you merge them, the world will be so fundamentally different that there will be this technological singularity where we can't even see beyond the event horizon. The term was coined by John von Neumann in 1958 and used by Werner Vinge in the 90s. But the technological singularity is when computers and humans merge. And Ray Kurzweil, for whom I have a lot of appreciation and respect, projects that this singularity is going to happen in 2045. That's 25 years from now. All of us on this call are going to be here in 25 years. And so the whole point of Singularity University, where I founded the entrepreneurship program, was to say, well, wait a minute, if we really believe this is going to happen and we see where this is going, what will 25 years, humans, computers, merged, the Matrix, how do we then create things, create new businesses, look at a world that is changing that rapidly? So I think that's another great book to read.
David, Amy, please.
Sorry, David, I'm not trying to upstage anyone here, but I would also suggest to entrepreneurs and innovators and creators and people who are really laying the foundation for the future of what this world will be, don't just read fucking business books, okay? Read history, read nonfiction, read fiction. Like, just read, right? Like, you do not need to read Malcolm Gladwell to know what you need to do. Just read. Sorry,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me extend that, right? And this comes down to the whole question of studying business in school and studying entrepreneurship in school. When entrepreneurs ask me, what is the best thing I can study if I want to be an entrepreneur? If I am an entrepreneur and I want to have an entrepreneurial career, what classes should I take in business and accounting and finance entrepreneurships? Forget it. You don't want to take those courses. You want to take humanities and arts and basic science. You want to take philosophy. The best thing you can do as an entrepreneur is to be well-rounded, because what the understanding of history, first of all, in terms of language, right? Communications. It's all about being an entrepreneur. It's all about communicating your vision, communicating to your employees, to your customers, to investors, to pitching. Communication is critical. You have to learn how to communicate. You can't be tongue-tied. Next, in terms of understanding things and coming up and solving problems, the best way I have found to do that is to analogize, to create analogies. Well, this is like this. Agatha Christie wrote a wonderful series of mysteries about Miss Marple, who was her sleuth, who lived in little old ladies living in this tiny little town in England. But she could solve mysteries because she analogized this this crime to something that happened in her little town with somebody who went to church with her, on a weekend. And so therefore, if you are well read in history and the arts and sciences, you can apply those things to totally new things that are happening in this technological era. So I absolutely agree. The best thing you do not focus. There are a couple of these books that you should read, right? The Singularities Near will give you an introduction to exponential technology. Things like the E-Myth will help you understand, how entrepreneurship works. If you want the nuts and bolts of how do you start a company, my book, the Startup Checklist, is great. But beyond that, absolutely read great literature, read interesting things, be as broadly read as you can.
David, thank you very much. Amy, thank you very much for this awesome and great interview. Appreciate that, and hopefully after these outbreak completes, hope to see you back, both of you, in Istanbul and Turkey, and have a great day over there in New York and Colorado.
David, thank you so much.
Look forward to coming back.
I wanted to thank you both as well. It was one of the best interviews, I guess, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.